Hi, this is Simon Obstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion, and today we're going to be taking a look at this scene in which a mysterious alien object rises out of some very dark water. So there are lots of interesting techniques in this one, and it's probably time to get started on it. So first things first, let's check up on our project setup. I'm going to go with 1920 1080, frame rate of 24 and a duration of 15 seconds. So the first thing I'm going to do is import my alien object. So come up to import, select alien object from the assets folder, bring that in, and that looks like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select its environment lighting, and I'm going to turn that down to nothing, and it's going to disappear. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a light, switch to 3D, and we're going to just kind of move this over, perhaps move it out a little bit, just to get us going. And the reason I turned off environment illumination is I don't actually want it interfering with the design because it introduces colors that I don't want. So, as you've seen, this alien object is going to rise up out of the water. And to create this effect, we need to basically mask off the top of the object and conversely mask off its reflection, as you'll see later on. So you'll notice that we can't actually apply a standard mask either to the group or to the object itself. And that means what we have to do is we have to make, in this instance, a rectangle. So using the rectangle tool, I'm going to draw a rectangle across the frame like that. Come over to geometry and let's actually set its width and height to 1080. The width is not actually that critical in this instance as long as it covers the object, and 1080 does it fine. So let's come over to style. Let's turn off outline, which is my default, and turn on fill. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure to reset its position, and then we're going to move it up on Y 540 pixels. So that's obviously selecting the top half of the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an image mask to this group, add image mask, and we're going to use the rectangle as the source. And now hopefully you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that we've masked off the top. So how are we going to do the reflection of the object? First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this group. So right-click, duplicate. And in order to get the reflection, I'm going to come down and I'm going to select the alien object in this new group, open up the scale, and I'm going to set a Y scale of -100. And then what we need to do is we need to come to the image mask and we need to invert it. So now we've actually got a perfect mirror of the top. So I've renamed those two groups. The bottom group is called main object, and this top one with the reflection in it is called reflected object. So what we want to do is, because this is reflected in water, we want to have the reflection ripple. In actual fact, I'm also going to just, to make it look more like a reflection already, I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this group down to 30%. Because that's a bit faint, I'm just going to increase the intensity of this light that we're using. We're not going to end up with lighting like this, but just so you can see what I'm doing here. So how are we going to create the rippled reflection? Well, to do that, we're going to make a new group, and we're going to turn this group to 2D, and I'm just going to drag it inside that reflected object group. And then I'm going to come over to the library and generators, and I'm going to grab cellular, and I'm going to put it into that group. I'm going to adjust the cellular values. So I want a size of 32, and let's increase the speed to 1. And let's come over and adjust its properties. I want an X rotation of -80, and we want an X scale of 300. And I'm going to come down to its anchor point and set that Y value to 540. I also want to select the group and make sure to switch it to fixed resolution. So I'm going to turn off this group and I've renamed it as Displace Map. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the reflected object group and I'm going to come to Filters and Distortion and Bump Map, and I'm going to select the Displace Map group and drag it into the source well. So you can probably see the beginnings of the ripple in the reflection there, but what we're going to do is we're going to increase that amount to 1, so it's much more pronounced like that. So we're starting to get there, but there are a couple of things we need to fix. The first of them is that the ripples are a little bit too sort of sharp and pointed for my taste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the cellular and I'm going to add filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to set that amount to 24. And you can see this kind of just softened it off. So it's looking a little bit better. Now, there is a problem, which is that the reflection here at the top is looking wrong. I mean, especially there, it's kind of parting company with the main object. And that doesn't look terribly convincing. So we can fix that by coming into the Displace Map group, and just above that cellular generator, I'm going to select the rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a rectangle kind of like that. So I want to turn off outline, I want to turn on fill, I want to make the fill color black. And I think as I do that, you can see what actually happens. That is kind of now killing that reflection at that section where it kind of meets the main object. But we need to be a little bit more precise about this. I'm going to come to the geometry, set it to 1080 square, and then over in its position, let's reset its position, and I want a Y position of 540. And then we're going to come to the shape style and adjust the feather, and let's go for something like 75. Now you'll notice that that doesn't appear to be quite in the right position, and no matter how we adjust the position of that box, it's not kind of going where we want it to be. So I'm going to leave that at 540. And the reason for that is we need to fill out this displacement map group with a color solid at the back. So I'm going to come to the library, I'm going to grab a color solid, put it into that group, move that object to the back, center back, and hopefully you immediately can see how the difference that makes. Now everything is kind of much more in register. And we also need to set that color to black, technically speaking. In actual fact, it's not making a huge deal of difference, but that's going to work, I think. So now you can see how that box with that feather is just kind of giving us that protection we need of that edge all the way through. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit closer. And what I would like to do is to have the water where it meets the object kind of lap up around rather than being this straight line that we've got with this mask that we created to divide the reflection, the main object from its reflection. So the first thing we need to do is when we made the reflection group, we copied the main object group. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the main object rectangle, which created the mask, if you remember, and I'm going to use it as the image mask for the reflected object group. And then I can delete that copy inside there. It'll just make life a little bit easier. So then what I'm going to do is select that rectangle, which is now driving both image masks, and come over to Filters and Distortion and Underwater. So I'm going to set the size to 1, the speed to 0.2, and the refraction to 10. And now I think you can see we've got this really cool effect of the water kind of rising and falling as it laps around the base of the object. And another thing I'd like to do with that area there is to add a little bit of kind of frothing to the water where it meets. So it's not just this kind of perfectly clean line. So what I'm going to do is at the top, I'm going to make a new group. And into that group, I'm going to add from the generators, again, cellular, bring that in. So come over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the height to 20 pixels. And the size, I'm going to set to 3. Then I'm going to open up the gradient. I'm going to throw away this black color tab there. I'm going to click on the top bar to make a new tab, drag that all the way over to the right. And the left-hand tab, I'm going to set the opacity down to 0. And I'm also going to set the blend mode of this group to add. So then what I want to do is I want to add to this group an image mask. So right click, add image mask. And the mask source is going to be that main object group. So bring that in as the mask. And then we obviously need to remember to turn back on that main object group because it automatically gets turned off. So then I want to offset this mask by 1 pixel on Y. So -1 on Y for the offset. And then I'm going to duplicate it, right click, duplicate. And I'm going to set the blend mode to subtract. And I'm going to set that Y offset to something like 6. So now hopefully you can see that that's now rising and falling with the waterline. It's a little bit too clean still. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the image mask, the lower one, either it doesn't actually matter, and come to stylize and crystallize. And I'm going to set that size down to 3. And the speed, I think I'm probably going to just kill because we don't need that. And you can see how that's kind of broken up that bottom line there. And we can just hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that onto the top. And now we've got a much more kind of organic effect. This is obviously looking much, much too bright, but it will look a lot better once we've sorted out the overall lighting for the scene, and we can probably knock it back a little bit. So I think now is probably quite a good time to look at the lighting. So I'm going to select that light that we've made, going to reset its transform, and I'm going to have a Z position of 75. And let's just come over here and set up its color. So what I want is sort of somewhere there in the in terms of hue, and something like that, probably quite a lot of saturation. Go for something like this. And I'm going to bring its intensity right down to 100 and its fall off to 30. And you can see how much moodier everything is and how that froth that we worked so hard on is now almost disappearing. And that's a good thing. We want things to be disappearing off into the gloom here. So then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this light. So right click, duplicate. And for this one, I'm just going to move it out on Z to 400 and come back over. I'm going to reduce its intensity down to 50 and its fall off down to 20. So finally, let's come on to the water itself. And I'm going to try and keep this simple, but the reality is that you want to kind of do water nicely, then you really have to expend a lot of effort on it. But we're going to go for something that's kind of quite simple and economical, at least relatively speaking. So the first thing we're going to do is make a new group, and I want this group to be at the back. So send to back, and I'm going to make a new group inside that. So object new group, put it into there, and we want this group to be 2D. So what I'm going to do with this group is come over to the library, and yet again I'm going to look for cellular, bring into that 2D group there. And I'm going to come over and set its size to 24. And I also want to come over to properties and set its X scale to 350. And then its X position, I'm going to right click, add parameter behavior ramp. And I want a start value of -200 and an end value of 200. And you can see how that's kind of drifting across. So a lot more work still to do. And the first thing we're going to do is actually just reduce the opacity of that, I think, down to 80%. And then we're going to duplicate it. So right click, duplicate. We're going to set the size of this duplicate down to 12. And we're going to set its blend mode to add. And so that's just created some smaller ripples. And we could actually make those ripples move a little bit faster by maybe going for sort of 250 for the end value of that. So they're not actually necessarily moving in sync. Might be good. So you're probably wondering what's going on here. But currently I'm just setting this up sort of flat on to the camera, but we're going to be rotating it eventually using this master 3D group. But first of all, I want to create a more convincing effect of waves. And to do that, I'm going to make a new group, and I want to stick it in here above that group containing the waves. And I also want to make it 2D. And into this group, I'm going to bring from the generators, the generator called stripes, bring that in there. I'm going to come over and set the width and height to 3000, and the size I want to set down to 30. And I also want to rotate it. So let's come to properties and rotate it through 70 degrees on Z. I typed a wrong number in here, haven't I? That the height should be 3000, not 300. So there you go. That's more like it. So then to this generator, I'm going to come to filters and add distortion and wave. And you starting to get the idea probably. So then I'm going to add to the offset a rate behavior. So add parameter behavior rate. And I'm going to set that value to -1. And you can see how that's drifting across. I'm also going to add filters, distortion, and underwater. Set the size to 1, the speed to 0.1, and the refraction to 75. And then I'm also going to add filters, blur, and Gaussian blur. And I'm going to set that blur amount to 12. So we can close up that stripes. And this group, we need to set that to fixed resolution. We can close that down as well. So this is going to act as a displacement for our main waves group. So let's turn that off. Let's add to this this group with the cellular elements in it, filters, distortion, and bump map. And let's use the stripes group as the source. So you can see how that's kind of distorting that in sort of wavelets now. And then what we can do is we can take this main group and then we can just rotate it so it's more like the surface of the water. I'm not going to go all the way because I'm going to cheat this. I'm going to go for -75 on that rotation on X like that. And you can see how this is kind of working. I might just throw in a light so you can get a better idea. This is not how it's meant to look, but it's just so you can see the overall effect. And what I want to do is I want to make the overall thing a little bit patchier, because the nature of water is that you kind of have patchy areas, that some that are brighter and some that are darker. So into my main 3D group here that contains everything else, I'm going to come to the library and I'm going to bring in, from the generators, I'm going to bring in clouds. I'm going to just drop it into there like that. I want to open up the gradient and I want to set this back end here, this black, to something like 50%. So I don't want it to be too black. And then I'm going to come into the offset and I'm going to add to the X offset, add parameter behavior rate off the bottom of the screen there. And I'm going to set that rate value to -0.01. And you can see that sort of kind of gently drift across. And then we can use that as a mask for our main waves. So we can turn this off, and this waves group here, this 2D one, right click, add image mask, and we'll use the clouds as the source, and we'll switch the source channel to luminance. And if I turn that on and off, you can see how that's kind of created this more patchy effect. And that's just, again, adding a little bit more kind of richness and visual interest to it. And I think probably what I want to do with the main group here is, as you see, it's not extending down as far as it ought to. So I am going to increase its Y scale. This is the 3D group. Increase that to 200%. And that's probably enough, I think, for our purposes, because I'm going to be pushing in with the camera. I think we have reached the point at which we need to add the camera. So add object camera. I'm going to come to properties and set its Z position to -1000. I'm going to turn off this dummy light that we created just to see things. We can get a bit more feel for the final scene. And then all I need to do is to add to the camera behaviors, basic motion, throw, switch to ramp to final value, open up the throw distance, and for the Z, I'm going to have -500. And you'll see that pushes us into there at the end. And the overall effect is looking like this. So as I say, we could make that water a lot better if we spent a lot longer on it. But, as a start, and because this is kind of dark, I think it's working fairly well. And obviously, I've forgotten to do the key bit of animation, which is to get the object to rise up out of the water. So how are we going to do that? We're going to come into this main objects group here, select that main alien object, and to its Y position, we are going to right-click, add parameter behavior, ramp, and then let's come to the beginning and decide where we want that to start. Let's come down to maybe, let's say, -100. And where do we want it to end? Let's come to the end. I want it to be not sort of bisected, so let's come up a bit. 100, yeah, maybe 100 is good. I think I like that. And the other thing I want to do is I want to offset it from the end so it finishes earlier. So let's go for something like 125. So it'll rise up and stop rising. The camera will keep moving on in. Now, obviously, the reflection is not following along. And all we need to do is we need to come into the reflected object group, select the alien object copy, and right-click on its Y position, add parameter behavior link, and we're going to link it to that alien object. So drag the alien object into the source well, and we want to set the scale to -1. And the overall result of that is this. The reflection looks correct. So here you go. This is the finished result, and I hope this has been an interesting tutorial, and thanks for watching.